All right, well, maybe we should get started. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. If you can't, you probably would have said so already. So my name is Nuno Couto. I am one of the organizers of the Meetup group. Most of the other organizers of the Meetup group, you can see some on video right now. Not all of them are, but some are. But anyway, we are happy to put this together. We have done probably about 7 or 8 of these Zoom meetups over the past year or so. And these are really put together to, to help out the community. There are absolutely no sales allowed. So if anyone is thinking of that, please don't. Occasionally we get non-CIOs joining. The focus of this meetup is on ERPs and how difficult it is to make a decision given limited options. And so what we're hoping to do is a couple of things. Number one, we have Steve McDevitt, Jeff Brown, and Cindy Mitchell, who will introduce themselves in a few minutes, just giving us their perspective. They'll have a little bit of a conversation at the beginning, and then we will open that up to the whole group. And then again, informal conversation. Feel free to ask any questions that are going to be of help to you. I think I'm going to pass it over to Tom, who's going to tell us a little bit about the mechanics of the meetings.
Sure. Yeah, not a problem. Hi, thank you everybody for joining today. Just a few things before we start. Since Steve, Jeff, and Cindy will be having sort of a introduction at the beginning of the call, we will have everyone else on mute. If you have a question that you want to ask, feel free to leave it in the chat. We'll be monitoring that during the beginning of the conversation, but also once we've finished that little intro, we will be breaking out into a roundtable discussion and we'll open it up for everyone to join us. So at that point, we'll hopefully unmute everyone and we'll all be able to ask and answer questions as we go. So, and after the meetup, one last item is that we'll be sending out a questionnaire to not only ask you all how we did, but to ask for potential suggestions for future topics. And if there's any materials or resources that are shared during the meetup, we will also be able to provide them there as well in an email after the event has concluded. So thank you so much. And I will bring it back to Nuno. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm just going to pass it over to Steve McDevitt. He's the CIO at St. Anselm, and he'll be helping us out with the panelist discussion. Steve.
So good afternoon. My name's Steve McDevitt. I'm the CIO at St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire. We're 2,000 students, Catholic Benedictine college up on a hill overlooking the city of Manchester. This conversation started with Nuno. I think we've had this conversation on and off for probably the past 2 years, both at a prior institution I was at and this one. But we're in a situation that a lot of folks I think are in right now. We implemented our current ERP system in 2007. It's the Junzibar CX platform. It's on-prem. We know we have to do something. We were actually planning to begin this project, this initiative last year. COVID kind of got in the way, but we're basically re-engaging now. And the series of questions I have is sort of prompted this particular meetup. Cindy Mitchell and I have spoken on a number of occasions and met with Jeff, for the first time last week. But it's an interesting situation that I think a lot of us are in, which is we have to do something. Whatever it's going to be, it will be painful. It will be expensive. You can do it right. You can do it very wrong. And the terrain, sort of the terrain of market of vendors and solutions out there is not huge. And so that's the point we're at right now. I was telling Nuno a few minutes ago, the reason I'm wearing my tie today is not because of this, although I should be wearing a tie for this, is we're actually having our first presentation to a committee in our board of directors, our board of trustees this afternoon, basically engaging them as sort of the first step in the process. And so What I thought we could do today is maybe start with Cindy, because Cindy's at Colby in Maine. In a weird way, and I'm not going to try to compare St. Anselm to Colby, but there are some dimensions in which we're a lot alike. We're about the same size, about 2,000 students. I believe you came from a Genzabar platform, and I'd be really interested to hear your story about when you began, which is, I think, is a good component of that, and where you're at now and how you got to where you're currently at.
I'm happy to share that. I just actually had to pull a presentation together that told that story as we're about to key up the next phase, which is the student information phase. So Colby, like poor St. Anselm, is on Genzabar CX, extremely heavily modified, very brittle, given that. And when I actually came to Colby 4.5 years ago, it was written right into the posting for the position that the next CIO would be responsible for modernizing the administrative systems. We can all ask why I still applied, but I had experience, I'd done it before, so I knew I could handle it. So we actually started the process of really evaluating where we were in the fall of 2016. And one of our first steps was to bring in Tambellini Group in May and June of 2017 to actually interview all the stakeholders across the campus who had direct responsibility, as well as the vice presidents. So we interviewed all of the student key stakeholders like the registrar, the bursar, things like that. We interviewed the staff in HR. We interviewed the financial staff to really get a sense of how did they feel about the technology they had, and how did they feel about moving forward? Because we knew if we didn't have buy-in from the folks who did the work, this was going to be an extremely difficult uphill battle. So once that was done, we had Tambellini do a market assessment to really understand what schools like us were doing and to really help us get the budget sized. And there's a question out there that's about where do you find the money. The very first thing you have to do is really understand for your institution, how much is this thing going to cost? So we spent a lot of time on it, and that is going to vary depending on how your institution tackles it and what product you end up expecting to buy. So we did our budget on the high end, giving us all kinds of room to go up to and include the most potentially expensive product when we did it. So with that process, we did an educational process. We brought in a bunch of different vendors so we could learn what modern systems like. Our folks had never seen modern systems, and we knew that was going to be a really big issue for the transformation. So we brought people in to show the various with standalone systems, ERP systems, different types of looks and feels. And it really was educational, but it created a lot of excitement for what's possible and helped people start to refine their thinking about it. Finally, we got to the point where we set up a trustee advisory group, and this turned out to be one of the most important things we did. We had a couple of trustee advisors who had done ERPs, and they became our advisory group, and they really helped us pave the way and prepare the conversations for the board, and they were with us through our entire HR and finance implementation. It was an amazingly helpful relationship to have. We are going to have those same folks, luckily, for the student implementation as well. So we actually never went into a board meeting and said anything. Our trustee advisors carried the message. It was great. All I had to do is get the materials ready. So it was a long journey because we didn't actually finish our selection process, which was Workday, until the end of 2018. We started the project. The official kickoff was July of 2019, and then we were live on HCM and finance in 2020. We did the big bang, just get it done, to rip the Band-Aid off approach. I can have long conversations. I do think that was the right thing to do, but you have to plan for it. So Steve, did I tackle the things that you wanted me to tackle in that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good introduction on how you got to where you are today. And I want to turn it over to Jeff, and Jeff has a different story simply because Champlain College is a part of the Green Mountain Higher Education Consortium. Did I get that name right? I think that's the official name.
Indeed, GMHEC.
And which is a combination, which is made up of Champlain, Middlebury, and St. Michael's College, all up in Burlington. So, Jeff, why don't you just take it from there?
Sure. Number one, terrific to be with you all today, and happy to be part of this conversation and recognize some friendly names out there in the audience. This is a different kind of a story because I've come from both state systems where we did some kind of consolidation of systems, but not necessarily a conversion. At UNC, I was part of a group, came here from UNC Asheville, and was part of a group in the UNC system that took all of our banner systems and moved those into a kind of a co-located hosting environment that was then managed by a team from the UNC system. And then we at the campuses were kind of consumers of that support system. Here at Champlain, as part of the Green Mountain Higher Ed Consortium, I came in late to the game. So what Cindy describes in terms of the selection process, engaging with a consultant, in this case for GMHEC, it was CampusWorks, working through all those kind of stakeholder processes sounds very familiar. I was not actually here for part of that. I got here just in time for the fun part, was the actual implementation and standing things up. And so a lot of what Cindy has said resonates with me as well. Candidly, what we might have benefited from was some of that planning and alignment better out of the gate. But we landed on the Oracle Cloud solution, which has been a good performer for us. And the decision there, to understand, and the kind of motivation behind the consortium was really around cost savings. And because both Champlain and St. Michael's were on the Ellucian colleague system, and Middlebury was on the Ellucian banner system, we're looking to align process and maybe kind of gain some efficiencies through our collaborative efforts there. 2.5 years later, we are finishing up the ERP HCM aspect of things. Finance has been in the can for about 18 months now. And now the next hill to climb is the student information system. So an interesting road ahead.
For both of you, with respect to the student systems, I mean, I think the approach that a lot of the platforms and vendors are sort of recommending is kind of what both of you have done, which is, start with finance and human capital or HR, and get that completely done, and then go to student. And that's the approach I believe you're both doing. Are the student platforms and I think the two of you can speak to at least those two platforms, are they where they need to be for you to be successful implementing a student solution? Cindy, if you want to go.
It's a great question. And actually, while a number of schools like us really licensed all three products up front and moved forward, we assessed that Workday Student at the time in early 2019, late 2018, wasn't in a position that we felt like we could really sell it yet to the institution. So we did not license it. And our process is going to be, we actually are working with Tambellini again to repeat one of the things I really want to do is make sure that the student stakeholders understand what their priorities are, what are the key things that we at Colby consider to be our core services to students that aren't only there because CX, that's the only way Jensenberg would let us do it. But why do we do business the way we do, to get that in hand and really then assess the systems based on that. And we're going to do another market pass. Just so that everyone has confidence going in. I do not believe there are many, and I think some that say there already are not, based on my assessment. So I'm really I'm actually retiring, so I won't be here for the dig in, though I will be standing behind my colleagues by chat, phone, and however I need to, but digging in and really doing that a market assessment, and I think is really, really important on the student side right now.
Wade is being, again, completely aligned with Cindy in that the GMHEC team aligned on the Oracle solution for ERP and HCM and kind of had a price hold or a foot in the door, if you will, for the SIS product. And it was not at a point of maturity where we're ready to definitively jump off on that. And now, as we kind of consider our approach to that, it's going to be another market assessment on this part, just to make sure everybody's really still solid on the product and that it's going to be able to deliver again to those kind of core services that we want to deliver.
Okay. In terms of, so do both of you see this on the spectrum of, I don't know if we had this conversation earlier before the meetup began, but, you know, on the one end, sort of, you know, pure digital transformation, you know, cloud strategy, you know, and I actually had somebody say to me the other day, you know, are we just replacing the damn finance system? And if that's all we're going to do, then I think the world is a different place. It's like, you know, go and select the cheapest, you know, financial system that'll work and be done with it. St. Anselm was in a mode right now. We have a new president who got here right before COVID, which is a really interesting way to start your time as president of a college. But he's very interested in, you know, being more data driven, being more metrics driven, and we see this as getting to a mature modern platform as being one of the prerequisite tasks that we need in order to get to that point. As Cindy said, we have a highly customized version of Genzibar CX. I have 4 full-time people that, you know, pray to Saint Isidore of Seville, the patron saint of the internet, and you know, yeah, to keep our CX platform running. And so I'm just curious, is like, do you see this as being transformational, or do you see this as just being part of the cost of doing business, you know, on the back end of the administrative and operational component of the college, of the institutions?
You want to go first with that one, Jeff?
Please do. Or if you said I would go first. Absolutely. I think it's a yes and. Number one, there is certainly cost pressure as we see kind of what the demographics look like in terms of higher ed and the continued, you know, evolution of services. And we were in the same position, it sounds like many folks were, which is on aging systems that weren't really meeting our business needs. And so the imperative to both find efficiencies as well as kind of a digital transformation, I think it was a dual motive for this. Now, I think cost may have really pressed and won the day in terms of what ultimately we selected, but we were at the point where literally any of the products we would have selected would have been a foundational step towards digital transformation for us.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jeff. It's really yes to all of those pieces. We had sit with finance sitting in Genzibar CX. It really wasn't Genzibar CX. It's 1,700 spreadsheets that are purpose built to deal with a chart of accounts that can't even handle all the permutations that you need and things like that. So, you know, not just any cheapo financial system would handle the complexity of Colby's financial system, but on the HRs and even the student side, it truly was transformation. I mean, we had to go remote in a pandemic with 100% paper processes that we had to figure out how to handle by email. If that had happened now, all of the HR processes are now online. And in fact, the transformation from an in-person paper-based approach to you doing it by email is really, really hard for long-term employees to take. They just got to see somebody. So those are some of the change management issues. But yeah, I mean, we see it as finally having data to actually drive decision-making. And that is transformative in and of itself, when before it would take 2 weeks to even get a report. So that helped. And then you weren't 100% confident of the data. So my answer is yes.
Okay. Just one last question, I think, before we sort of open it up is, you know, with the hindsight of being midway through these large initiatives, you know, if you had to go back and do 1 or 2 things different, you know, what would they be? I think that's one of those things that, you know, to the benefit of the people, you know, who are going to be doing this after you, you know, what would you wish you would have known back in 2016 and 2017 that would have made things easier or better? Well, let's
I know
see.
your situation's a little different, Jeff, at Middlebury. I think my answer could be a little quicker, and I'll go first. One, do the backfill and then actually hire people into it. We did a budget for backfill, and then we didn't do it early enough. We had the budget start for July 1, and guess what? That's when the project started. The backfill, you will need it, and hire well in advance to get people in place and ready. Number one lesson. Number two, don't ask for heat maps that you can pretend will tell you how much work people will have to do, what their commitment to the project will be at certain points in time, because it ain't true. And, we did for a couple of months try to project for vice presidents so they wouldn't tap people too hard for their own request to try to project how busy people would be. It's your own pace. It's your own complexity. It's your own learning. How much are you also being pulled off? So I would say ignore heat maps and just assume your people are pretty much dedicated to the project, period. Those are my two big ones.
Okay, thanks.
And I will again respond with a yes and if you think about that triplicate and trying to kind of coordinate that across three very different institutions with different cultures, I think there was some good foundational work done to kind of bring people together, align them on the goals for the project, and we could have spent more time, especially aligning the IT teams and the functional teams to understand exactly kind of what the commitment was going to be. And kind of how that project was going to roll out. I always kind of go back to the ITIL model of the people, partner, project, process, etc. In this case, getting the people and the partners, the IT and the functional teams really well aligned on the same page in terms of culture, in terms of the commitment, and again to Cindy's great point about backfill and or supplementation with partners. And then understanding what the project, what are the kind of the processes, having a strong data governance process and a team in place, trying to align that across three different institutions. I think we could have spent more time there to kind of get our data well aligned and our process more aligned. So we kind of did a lot of the building the plane as we fly it, which is a Champlain thing, but not necessarily the norm at St. Mike's or Middlebury's. So some kind of culture sharing that we did there inadvertently. And then really to think about in terms of the system architecture, definitely have been seeing in systems. Greg Woolley and I, once upon a time, were at USF together, and the team there had a PeopleSoft implementation that was highly modified. And so every time a monthly patch or something came out, it was a pretty big lift to kind of get that put in and then get all the modifications put back into place. And so really understanding what your system architecture is going to activate for you and getting your team prepared to deal with that in terms of, is it configuration, is it modification? And from the Oracle perspective, really kind of landing on a best practice about like, how are you leveraging the way that the product works to get the most out of that and really spare yourself a lot of pain and trying to kind of back an old process into a new product. But that would be some of my highlights.
Okay, thanks. So Tom, you want to open it up?
Absolutely. Everyone should now have the ability to unmute themselves. And we actually already have a question from Dave Souza in chat. Dave, do you want to join us in conversation?
Hi, yeah, thanks. This has been really interesting to listen to. Johnson & Wales is considering things. We've been a banner school since 2004. And my question was kind of to Cindy and Jeff, what role is CRM expected to play in the sort of SIS specific question? Like, we've got a College of Online here that's a little more progressive, and they're really building their processes out in Salesforce. And so they're, in some ways minimizing the SIS in the overall process and really trying to manage things in Salesforce, where they kind of operate a little rogue, but they've been really successful in setting up cases to manage financial aid and do some really interesting things. So I just didn't know if that could or would play into you or anyone else's plans around excuse me, SIS and sort of the need for the real next gen kind of features.
I'll jump into that. Like, it sounds very much similar to you. Champlain College has kind of two primary revenue streams, if you will. Champlain College Online, which is our obviously online adult learners, professional education focused, and then our traditional on-campus undergraduate experience. We use Salesforce for both of those. And so that was a key consideration, is our ability to kind of leverage our Salesforce platform. Now, my understanding is Oracle does have kind of a quasi CRM overlay on the student information system product, but that's an intentional choice that we're making, is to basically build out Salesforce and use that in a way. I think another, kind of what your question leads into is where does that data from both the SIS and then Salesforce, how do you integrate those? And our choice is looking at kind of a data lake, data warehouse model, where information from our ERPs, our SIS, and then Salesforce are all going to be able to be kind of commingled, so that we can kind of leverage all of that together.
And say that I haven't been successful in my 4.5 years really getting the focus on CRM it should be. And frankly, I think that there's a lot a CRM does, but the core processes of the college, the management of student records, the management of courses, those pieces have to be done in a really excellent ERP. And frankly, Colby was forced to have some online presence because of COVID. We're very much present in-person environment. And so it's been amongst those who are responsible for communication, the CRM solution has been a hard one for them to embrace or frankly see the value of. So there's a part of me that feels like somehow I haven't really told the story well. On the other hand, we have such a fundamental problem with the data that we have. I haven't wanted to upset the apple cart on moving that forward over a battle over CRM. And because, it's a conservative, it's the one way it's a really conservative institution. We are very much in person, and really we go very, very slowly for change. Initially, our Workday implementation was only going to fix HR, and it was only because I could really pull the case together around cost and effort that I was able to get HCM and finance at the same time. So I would love to be in those shoes, but again, it was sort of a risk assessment on my part of, am I going to lose the whole approach if I go too hard after CRM, frankly?
Does anyone else in the group like to address that question as well? Your thoughts on what role CRM played in your decisions as related to ERP?
I can see we have some other questions in chat as well.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So Troy, you had a question, Troy McFarlane?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, so to kind of build upon the other questions related to the CRM and the SIS systems, how did you manage the scope at the beginning versus what was finally delivered? So my main area of interest is around learning management systems, and then also identifying within the ERP whether or not you're going to use the existing talent management functions as part of the human capital management capabilities, or if you have to integrate other products. So basically just around what was your pressure to consider integration of other products that could be external, and how did you manage the scope? Thanks.
So we're just teeing up our student implementation right now. We have Slate for admissions and we have PowerFades for financial aid. We just, not on the table. Those departments are very, very happy with those products. And so we're assuming integration with those. I do assume integration with, well, we have to have integration with the LMS. So that's not a worry. With HCM, the provost office, which really runs its own sort of mini HR, is on Interfolio. And that was not anything that would entertain for replacement either. I think, interestingly, we're starting to see where they realize some of the things we pointed out would be a challenge for them by staying on Interfolio are starting to raise up. So there may be a opportunity down the road to change that. But, again, it was sort of risk management. Who are those people that are really, really happy with what they have, actually have a modern solution? Where can you integrate them? And how do you keep it moving forward so that a battle over those things doesn't cost everybody else progress? So you set those aside, and maybe they'll come along, maybe they don't. So that was our approach. I will say that one other thing we did ahead of doing any implementation, we did get ourselves on an enterprise integration platform. That was we had a timeline, I talked about a long timeline to get to that choice, but we had things we were doing to get ready, like replacing a bunch of homegrown systems that took a lot of IT time. We called them the things that eat our lunch. That was actually a plank in our strategic initiative. We worked on getting rid of those, and we were getting an integration platform up, and we also worked on getting Okta in so that we didn't have so much homegrownness around our identity and access management.
And I'll build on that. And what's interesting about Champlain is we were actually on Workday for HCM before moving to Oracle for HCM. And so it was an interesting kind of lift and shift of some functionality. But part of the intention, and actually what we're implementing now, is the Oracle Recruiting Cloud piece, which is kind of the last component for us. So that's very intentional on our part, was to make sure that moving from a highly functional next-gen system to another one, that we tried to lose as little functionality as possible in that kind of move. And we also use Handshake for our student kind of recruiting and internship efforts. So the ability, like I think somebody in chat said, integrations are key. That's so correct in terms of maintaining the continuity of data and being able to leverage all of your systems together. That was key for us moving forward, to make sure we have a bunch of kind of best in breed stuff that we kind of mix and match. And so to be able to maintain and continue to do that without having it eat our lunch is absolutely a huge priority.
So I have a question for Jeff. One, it's good to see you again, Jeff. Jeff and I worked together a long time ago at USF. So this is the first time I've seen you in years. So it's great to see you. When you say that you moved from Workday HR and Finance to the Oracle Cloud, was that solely a financial decision, or was it also that it was not meeting your needs functionally?
That's a great question. So from our perspective, and for clarity, we moved from the Workday HCM system to Oracle. We were on Finance and SIS on Lucy & Colleague. And ultimately, it did come down to price and to align with our consortium partners. In all candor, apparently we considered the Ellucian suite, we considered Workday, and Oracle was really the only one who came forward with a price point that was good enough for us to move and kind of lift and shift all of that. But yes, that probably price was the primary consideration there, and alignment.
I see that Jeffrey Butera also had a comment, and also would like to add that, again, everyone is able to unmute themselves at this point, as well as go on video. So if you feel comfortable, feel free. Jeffrey?
Thank you. I mean, I don't really have a question maybe I'll change my comment into a question for the folks, on the panel who've gone down the road. Again, in my view, I see integrations, again, in modern, robust integrations, not flat file transfers that many of us have done for the last 25 or 30 years, as hallmark or linchpin, because we all have disparate systems. No matter what we get for a SIS or an ERP, it's not going to solve every problem on our campus. So the question for the panelists is, did enterprise architecture and integrations play heavily, minorly, somewhat in your decision-making process, or am I off in the weeds with my desire to try to really make things in terms of, not just integrations, but, really trying to develop an enterprise plan to get the ERP and the SIS playing in the swimming pool with a lot of other things on campus?
I have sort of an interest, because we're kind of in the midst of that right now. Actually came from a very, very deep EA background before I got into higher ed. So that is exactly the road that we are going down, which is recognizing that there's going to be a core set of solutions, whether it's Oracle, whether it's Workday or whatever. But then, and it's funny, and Cindy, as you're talking, it's like, wow, there's a lot of similarity. I mean, we use Slate on the front end. We use, you said Slate, Okta, and Power Fades. I mean, those are these things that are going to exist independently. But I think, Jeffrey, to your last point, is we got to get out of this world of the ad hoc, one-off, everything. Oh yeah, every integration is like, oh yeah, I just need this one thing, right? And then like you end up maintaining it for 20 years. And but so our world, I sort of anticipated, and Milo's from where's he from? In Western Michigan or wherever he's from, Michigan. He and I were talking a couple meetups ago. He has like 50 systems, and they were all, again, decisions that were made at different points in time. And I think what the sweet spot for us is to try to get that down to whatever that handful of things is. Yes, financial aid is going to continue to use Power Fades unless somebody comes up with a better financial aid mousetrap, and I don't see anybody doing that right now. That's going to be it. Okta for identity. We use Blackbaud's Razor's Edge for advancement. That's going to continue. We use Slate on so the way I sort of draw the picture now is Slate is on the front end. Once they matriculate, they're in the big system. And then out the back end, our advancement and alumni relations folks, they're a Blackbaud shop. And I think that model is gonna be sort of our core enterprise. And again, things may change in 5 or 10 years, but there's a lot of embedded knowledge in how Blackbaud, how Razor's Edge does things. And we have some folks who are very comfortable there and they like the way they work there. And why would we want to change that? Is an interesting component of that discussion.
I think after way too many years of doing this, I did a PeopleSoft implementation for 7 campuses, the University of Maine system in the earlier 2000s. And what when you look at these is there's no ERP or no one vendor that does all of those really important functions really, really well. We looked at PeopleSoft contributor relations at the time, and it was pretty clear the advancement folks were not going to get what they needed. So we ended up implementing then what was, I think it had just changed from BSR to SunGuard, which is now Ellucian Advance. So, so we are in a world, I mean, if you just look at the student ecosystem alone, Teradata, Maxiant, there's just one thing after the other. So actually, not enterprise service bus, but sort of in that architectural theme. When one of the first projects we did with Talend, which was the integration platform we bought, is develop a sort of a service bus of student data so that we had one pool and reusable integrations, because we had 1,000 different things that wanted things a different way. And thinking ahead to a student implementation, that is going to really make our lives so much simpler to have one place the data goes with the integrations already built from that, because there are a lot of them. We have a diagram that I presented to our steering committee and the board when we did an assessment of everything that we had and everything hanging off of it. And it's colorful, shall I say, and busy. And we've done nothing but add to it since.
So it sounds like Troy actually has a question. Sorry, Jeff. Didn't mean to.
No, I said we kind of backed into ours because some of these kind of core decisions about the Oracle stack had been made. And so we're actually trying to kind of architect around some of that and then identify where our best of breed solutions are going to persist so that we can kind of stand up an integration platform. We're using the EAB Education Data Hub kind of as our backend data warehouse, and to do some interesting things with data there. So.
So I had another question to kind of continue what Cindy was mentioning. So in another message forum, I was listening to or reading about how another university, how they had switched from their legacy ERP, and they were focusing on the check payment capability. So they had, through their selection process, they had asked the vendor, ADP in this case, whether or not they could handle the ability to do specific types of API calls. And at the end of the day, after they were already implemented and they already committed, they found out that the the design of the APIs was more suited for a pull, more for reporting versus the concept of the push and the data entry type of activities. Can you just talk to us about your selection process and whether or not you did any type of agile prototyping or any type of MVP before you went all in and signed the contracts?
Well, I don't mean to sound flip, but everything looked better than what we had. I mean, we were on an old version of ADP that literally all you did was grab data, push it into the thing, and they produced a check. So one of the things I think that's a really important change management component, and I mentioned this earlier, our folks hadn't seen modern systems. And so part of this was an education for them to see modern systems and see what different things could do. We didn't do the kind of thing you're talking about because our folks wouldn't have been in a position to really assess it. And so we relied a lot on the market share reports, the reports out of Tambellini Group and Gartner and EAB and anybody else we could get our hands on, and a lot of peer-based discussions and a lot, not being out front. We did a lot of work connecting with our colleagues around lessons learned, because there are a number of them that are very similar to us in what we had. Nobody had quite as old an ADP as I think we were the last remaining person on that particular version, but we did not. And I think if you're in a place where you can make that happen, it's a really good thing to do. I'm just, given what I went through with PeopleSoft and even with Workday, I don't know how you test or get the right thing that could make you feel confident, because there are so many processes and any one of them could be the thing that isn't quite what you expect. So I think you'd have to really identify what's our most important process so you can show me that, if you could do that proof of concept. And it would be hard to pick, particularly on the student side, I think.
Did either of you achieve any sort of reduction in staff requirements, either in your HR area or in your finance area, because you went to a more modern solution?
We did not. No, we did get a lot of capability that we didn't have before, but we did not actually diminish staff or effort.
Okay.
So I was just looking at Jeff and Tim's point, talking about requirements, and we did not do a detailed set of requirements. We did something a little lighter because, again, we were concerned. When we started having the conversations around requirements, people couldn't separate what CX did, and it was the only way to do it, from what you should want. But we are going to take a different tack with students on the student system for sure, and really get people to think in terms of service and outcomes for their requirements rather than how things work. So that's just a pivot that was certainly something we learned in this, that I think vitally important for students, because there are too many high-level stakeholders in this that may have conflict. We need to iron that out, because with so many vice presidents and divisions in the student space, we need to make sure that we're on the same page.
Cindy, with respect to that, so on the HR finance side, and you mentioned something a couple of weeks ago when we spoke, and I actually wrote it down, best practices as delivered, sort of embrace that model of, especially when you're going from a place, and I think we're in a similar place where all of our stuff is on paper. It's very manual. I mean, I have to physically walk certain forms to certain rooms in certain buildings to get certain things done. And so clearly on the finance and HR side, I think that model is something that works. But I think on the student side, and as your point is, there's a lot of stakeholders in student, and some people have been our equity and compliance person has been doing the same job for 30 years, and I doubt he's going to change anything. The fact that we have Maxient now is actually a big win, because we're no longer completely on paper. So.
I just wanted to mention that Michael Diekman had a question related to the staffing question. Michael, did you want to add to that, or was that question answered?
It was answered. Actually, it was kind of a reply to somebody else's question that said, has anybody seen staffing reductions from Workday? My question is, do we ever see staffing reductions from ERP implementations? I don't think so.
No.
And Kurt, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. This is very informative. Thank you for your insights. We just signed a 5-year deal with Elution, and so fine. I mean, we were not at a point where we really could take an opportunity to search on, for other alternatives. But I'm just moving into this CIO role, and I'm really not a technical person at any level, but providing some leadership to our group. And so as I'm thinking out over a 5-year period of time, what I'm hearing from this conversation and other conversations that I've had is that the time is now to start a process of determining if what our options are. Am I missing something? I mean, are you in agreement that this is going to be at least a 3-4 year period of time decision? And do you dare do this without the help of somebody like Tambellini or somebody else that can help you through this process?
I think it's exactly the time to start. I've had a couple of conversations with colleagues lately who have 3 years left or 2 years left, and they think they're going to get it done. And not if you're going to keep your institution sane through that process. I mean, a particular institution the size of mine, we have, if you were doing HCM, finance, student, all within that tiny window, their role is in all 3 of those spaces, and it's unsustainable in my mind. And I think the planning and the inclusion and bringing people along, if you've got a window to start now, do it. You need to accept that what's available in 5 years is going to look, it's us, dramatically different. But the process of inclusion, identifying what's important, getting tuned into the market so you recognize changes as it's happening is vital. And I will tell you, I have a master's degree in English. So, the leadership required for these roles is about leading people and change and creating inclusive conversations. So don't worry about that technology part.
I agree. I'm doing okay in that regard, but appreciate those words. Kind of going back to Tambellini, I'm somewhat familiar with them. I'm at Concordia University in Nebraska. We're part of a larger system with a very loosey-goosey system, but they have helped us through our last this last contract negotiations with Elution. Are there other firms out there that people can recommend for me to look at? Because I just feel like I need to start having these conversations, and I'm going to probably be that point person within our system to kind of like push people along to say, hey, look, we need to start this conversation now.
So there are a couple of other folks that do this quite a bit. Jeff, wasn't it Campus Works that the consortium used? There's Morin. I hate to even list names because I know I missed somebody, but probably those are the 3 that pop up. I think Goldstein Associates may do some of this work. I know they do business process work.
Lockstep Group is a new one that we're partnering with now.
Kurt,
Barry Dunn is another one that does this, and I've used them. They're great for other things. They do a lot of great business process work and data governance work.
Yeah, Kurt, there's one dimension that's also important for those of us who are on Genzabar on CX. One of the risks that we identified was the vendor risk that Genzabar has lost, and Tambellini, and that's the thing. If you're related, if you know Vicky and you're pay for their service, you can get access to it. It's like they have lost a significant number of institutions to a point where when you do the revenue expense on the vendor side, you sort of scratch your head. It's like, okay, is there a risk that this is an ongoing concern on their part? And so we don't think that we have another 5 years. And so that's why I think we need to make the decisions now. Worst case scenario, you could hobble along with our own staff and sort of freeze what we currently have for a couple years. But beyond that, I don't think there's another 5 years for us to decide on what we're going to do.
I think the other thing with 5 years as well is it really gives you time to build out a really excellent financial business case. It gives you more time to look at the cost. I was telling the folks here beforehand, we just learned we're going to get a huge hit, an increase from Genzabar, and I'll bring it on because it just makes everything else look better. Not that I want to pay more money, but the reality is, the business case, the numbers look bad up front and looks like you're going to pay a lot more money. But when you start figuring out some of the other pieces and costs that, you're paying also a lot of money for things that cause you to have to buy other things that are in the gap. So I think that 5 years is a great runway, really.
And it gives you the opportunity to kind of get some of those core things like data governance and start to kind of build the consensus of the team and get everybody kind of on the same page as to what the deliverables are. I cannot underscore how important that is to success and how much it can accelerate. Once you actually move into implementation of product selection, it can move all that stuff much faster.
Final question. I don't want to take all the time here, but is how much of a crossover in costs is there generally in this transition? That's what I always kind of hear is like, oh my gosh, the budget within that when you're doing that transition, is it generally like a 1 year or is it 2 years that you're paying double, so to speak?
That depends on your vendor and what you're able to negotiate. We were able to negotiate peeling off modules that we weren't using, but in prior life, we were not able to do that. You had to be really ready to roll completely off. So it really depends on what your contracts are.
We did similar. We deprecated some modules that we weren't using and then planned for about a 6-month overlap. So we were trying to pay as minimal as possible, obviously, but to have a safety net, that was one of the concerns.
We are getting close to 1 o'clock and want to be respectful of everyone's time. If folks want to continue beyond 1 o'clock and are able to, we can certainly leave this Zoom meeting on for anyone who wants to have a further conversation. There was one question from Patrick Burns that if we can answer in about a minute would be great. His question is, and he's not able to join. He said, how are institutions finding the very large amount of money to go with Workday? Obviously, Workday is pretty expensive. Any thoughts from the panelists or really anyone else in the group?
I'm fortunate enough to work for an institution that has a strategic investment fund and had been planning for this, knew it was going to be something that they had to address. At my prior institution, it was a combination of budgeting and bonding. So I think it depends on what you have available to you. It also may mean you have to space it out more. You may have to do things more linearly if a one-time squeeze on the cost is too high.
And in our case, we kind of had to map this against, what was the payback period and kind of a longer term return on investment model that kind of satisfied all three of our partners' needs. So that was a little interesting dance to do to kind of align on the product and then, kind of what the financial implications were.
This was one of our most interactive conversations. I had a number of questions ready to go and I didn't even have to ask them. This is great. I'd really like to thank Jeff and Steve and Cindy for participating and all of you for coming as well. If we can be of any assistance in any way in terms of bringing people together, making introductions, providing access to any resources that we have access to, we're happy to do that. And if any of you want to have something of interest that you want us to put together a meetup around the topic that you're very interested in, we can certainly add it to the list and we're happy to do that. You could even take the spot of Steve McDevitt and you could facilitate it and make it as useful to you as possible. So again, thank you very much for joining. And if anyone wants to stay on, please feel free. We'll stay on with you, or those of us that can will stay on with you. Thank you again.